everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and our guest today is David Blistein. Lest I be accused of any nepotism at all, I just want to say right out front that David is my husband. We've been married for 40 some odd years, and we are going to talk to him about the many things that he does in the community, and we're going to play it straight, or try to. So thanks for joining us. Welcome, David, to the show.
I'm going to play it straight.
Okay.
Am I done now?
So,
yes,
David,
yes, Wendy.
You were born in Providence, Rhode Island.
I was.
You were born into a pretty academic family.
Yep.
And could you talk a little bit about your early days and what it was like to grow up on a campus of a university in Providence?
Yep, my dad taught Shakespeare at Brown, and my mom went to Brown, and she ended up as a trustee, and they were very closely connected to it. My dad taught me how to write by taking my papers and saying, now you think you're saying this, but the words are actually saying this. And I would say, you're wrong. And but he really taught me how to write there. And when I was 6 and my brother was maybe 8 or 9, we moved into a college dorm, and because my dad was a resident fellow. And so I had 30, 40 big brothers. It's where I first smelled marijuana, not knowing what it was I was smelling. It's where I first saw someone on an acid trip, not knowing that's why he was acting like that. And just hung out in these. I think it's the first time I saw Playboy Centerfold, by the way. And most importantly was the time, I must have been 11, and one of the guys said to me, come down to my room, I want to play something for you, and I want you to remember that I played it for you. And I said, really? He said, yes. I listened. It was, I Want to Hold Your Hand. So it was the first time I heard the Beatles, though I didn't know until years later.
Yeah, but you remember it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Just like I'm supposed to.
Yeah, that's great. And so from there you went on to college.
I did.
Yep. And you went to Amherst.
To Amherst.
And you had some pretty great teachers at Amherst.
I had a lot of good teachers. And I was able, it's funny, a lot of my friends went to Hampshire, and they had a whole structure at Hampshire for doing what you wanted to do, but as a structure, whereas at Amherst, if you wanted to do what you wanted to do, you just need one professor to sign a bunch of forms. And I was lucky that the professor I had, at least for the last few years, was Robert Stone, who's, won the National Book Award, just a great sort of classic writer in the Hemingway, Joseph Conrad tradition. And he was just great. I mean, he just let me write. He let me write, and he read it, and let me write, which is what writing's all about. But the best story I have about Bob Stone is that one day I had something to deliver to him, a paper or something, and I knocked on the door, because I used to go over there, and he opened the door and he hesitated, and then he said, well, okay, come on in. So I entered the kitchen. There were these 2 big, loudmouth, obnoxious, drunken guys with Bob and his wife, and I'm thinking, who can these people be? How can they be friends of his? I like Bob. And he said, this is Ken Kesey and this is Ken Babs, who, I don't know, maybe your audience is too young to know who they are,
we have a very wide audience here.
You do.
Yeah.
And Stone is mentioned very briefly in the electric Kool-Aid acid test in Kesey's book, but he was really a good friend of theirs. He was at Stanford, I think, in the Wallace Stegner program, which is where all those guys met. So it was it was great to meet him.
So having that, this was the late 60s, early 70s, actually the 70s, and there was a lot of free form going on in colleges in those days. That was really a time for that. How do you think that informed your writing over the course of time?
I think that when you're in college, or when you're first writing, you tend to get heavily influenced by the people you're reading, by the people they have you read. And so since I didn't read Shakespeare at all, because my dad taught it, so I resisted it at all costs. If you look at some of the stuff I have, I think most of it is destroyed, but it had that sort of Robert Stone apocalyptic vibe to it. It's a real time of experimentation. I'm always amazed that some people can write a book right after college, because I don't know, you're just really finding your way. Yeah. And the best thing I did for writing, of course, not to jump ahead, but I ended up doing a lot of, I had an ad agency, a lot of that kind of writing, and to write nonfiction, and just to keep writing and writing. That's what it's about, and learning how things work, and realize that you can write about science, even if you never took a science course. You can write about whatever you want. It's just all about subjects doing verbs to predicates with a lot of other words running around them in a way that makes sense to people or is interesting.
Yeah, and so in some ways you actually got the structure of writing later, when you were actually making a living instead of in school as much.
Right.
Yeah.
And well, actually, I had one professor named G. Armour Craig. I assume he's passed by now, but it was a great course because either 2 or 3 times a week, and you had to write a 2-page essay for every single class. So that whole thing of saying exactly what you meant in exactly that amount of space was what marketing copy is all about, whether it's a 30-second radio ad or a half-hour TV show.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a brochure or an annual report, whatever it is. But having that discipline to write to length was very valuable.
Did you enjoy writing then?
Writing's fun when it's fun. Writing's fun when you hit it. It's like catching a wave. When you catch the wave, it's great. And then there's the phases of writing to me are catching the wave, pushing them like you're pushing a boulder up a hill.
Right.
And then there's the part that I call raking leaves, which is that when you're editing or moving forward, you rake the leaves, you get the words together, then a wind comes and blows them all away and they don't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
And then you rake them more together, and that's how the thing comes out. So, I mean, different parts are fun, different times.
Yeah. And then out of college, so you had to get a job, getting out of college.
I know, that's what everyone
but
told me.
It was
Actually,
like,
did you? No, I didn't know you
yet.
It was
70, you didn't know me yet.
Yeah.
It was 74, so getting a job in those days was a little bit different than getting a job nowadays.
Yeah, and I don't even know what I thought, but I worked in a bookstore in college, the Jeffrey Amherst bookstore. I think it's still there. People go down there. And I met a salesman for Avon Books, which was both a mass market and a trade publishing house. And so he got me a job selling books. My territory went from Bangor, Maine to Horseheads, New York. I didn't, and occasionally into Boston, but it was mostly that sweep around.
So did you meet any interesting people as you were a book journeyman?
Well, you know, there were a lot of really beautiful women and sell books. I mean, some of the most beautiful women, as you know, work in bookstores. And there was one, and she was in a store out near Syracuse somewhere. And I always remember I went into a store in downtown Syracuse, and there was a guy with the amazing name of Achilles Nichols. What better for a bookstore? And we got done, I was selling him the books. He said, you should go out to Fayetteville, which is another town. He said, you should meet my buyer there. Her name's Wendy. You might like her. So, like, I met her, and my eyes opened wide. It took me a year to get her to go out with me. But I don't know what happened.
Well,
yeah, that'll
seems
be,
like everything.
I'll have you on a show sometime.
Seems like everything turned out okay.
Yeah, we'll see after the show if we still feel that way.
Okay, so moving right along to Brattleboro.
To Brattleboro.
You come to Brattleboro, which I believe was in 1980. It was shortly before John Lennon was killed. It was shortly before Reagan was shot. You were living in West Brattleboro with a 2-year-old. And a wife.
She was 2, and a wife.
And a wife. And can you talk a little bit about how your relationship to Brattleboro has changed, or how you've seen changes happen in Brattleboro in, how many years is that?
I don't count.
It's way too long. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's funny. When I was first in Brattleboro, I had this business in Keene.
Right.
So I was very Keene-focused in a way. And my joke about Keene is that, and Brattleboro is that in Keene, if you went to the Y at 6 in the morning, place was humming. Whereas if you're in Brattleboro at 8, things are just kind of getting going, you know. But what I remember most about downtown Brattleboro then, at least, is being with our daughter Emily, you know, and she would, and I think about this when I see kids now, because I actually wrote a short story once and took some pictures where I followed her around town. I just followed her. Yeah. So sometimes she'd be like half a block away. Yeah, I know that's right. You're her mother.
Things I don't want to think about. Yeah, go ahead.
But, you know, you had that kind of, it was a little more open, free then, and we'd go into the Dutch Bake Shop, which some people remember.
Which is now Woody's, isn't
it?
Woody's?
Isn't it Specialized Sports?
Specialized Sports with the three concrete steps
That's
up.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I remember with them that was really fun is we'd go to the bar, the Via Condati, on, which was, I don't know what's there now, on Elliott Street. And I would sit there and have a beer, and we'd watch the football game, and they'd bring Emily the little creamers, and she'd do the creamers. So, you know, that was my relationship to Brattleboro, that it was a weekend place. That's right. It was a while before I really sort of made it feel like my town. So
sometime in the early 80s, you were still working in Keene, you were working at the ad agency, and you had some kind of interesting accounts to start off with.
You know, people think advertising, they think real consumery stuff, and we had, I wasn't actually an owner then, I was their writer. We had banks, we had insurance agencies, we had healthcare. The closest thing we had to a consumer account, the new one, was in 1983 or 4. a guy named David Hall and Pat Gallup started PC Connection, which people probably remember. It still exists. I think it's called The Connection now. And in 1984, personal computers were still very suspect. Real computer geeks would get parts from the back of the TR, the Radio Shack thing, and they buy them. And this guy, David Hall, IBM had just come out with their first personal computer, and this guy, David Hall, wanted to do something with it, and he bought what's called a multifunction board. It's hard to even to believe what this is. This is a one floppy drive. When you wanted to share the data, you had to save the data, you had to put it in a different floppy drive, or at least there were two. And he said he saw there was a market for this stuff, that people could get the basic PC and expand it. And he said, I want to be the LL Bean of computer mail order. So we connected him with a really good artist in Peterborough named Eric Ingraham, and I wrote the copy, and it was this raccoon, the same way you have the Geico now. Back then we had the raccoon walking into an old New England village with a keyboard over his shoulder. We probably did like 30 or 40 of them, and with the most brilliant and atrocious puns that you've ever read in your life. It was great fun, and it did personalize, made it friendly, made computer technology friendly. Now they got to the point where it became, as it is, I think, mostly now all price. So, but you know, you see something like the Gecko. When I see the Gecko, I think, oh, there's really a place for that kind of advertising that humanizes. And it's often done with animals, which is what's interesting. It humanizes whatever the product is. So it was great. And, as I say, banks, other companies. But again, we were talking about writing. I wrote about ball bearings a lot. I wrote about
sluice skates.
Sluice skates, that's right. I wrote about fog nozzles. The nozzle, they're down in, I think they're still down in Greenfield. That was on the space shuttle, and the coated M&Ms.
Yes.
Not space shuttle. Did they have the space shuttle back then?
I don't know.
Same idea.
Yeah.
So this is where, you know, again, I had one physics course in college. That's the only science course I ever took. So you just study this stuff. So for writing, it's great.
Yeah. And for learning on the fly.
And for learning on the fly. And people saying, wow, how do you know so much about this stuff? And it's like, well, I don't actually. But
if you read the ads,
this is what I know. This is what I know, exactly. I even posed as David Hall in an ad.
That's right.
That was fun.
A doctor, wasn't that?
I was a doctor, too. Yes, I was a doctor in an ad.
Yes, your mother had that on the refrigerator for years.
Yes.
Her son, the doctor.
Her son, the Jewish doctor, that's right.
She was very proud of that.
That's right. Yeah. But I also had another business.
That's right, you did.
I had another business, and my friend Joe and I started in the late 80s importing soaps and other creams, lotions, and stuff from France. And
body products, we call them now.
That we call them? And we went to Europe a few times. And unfortunately, it's still in business. It's a great business, Baudelaire, which I thought was great because after the French poet, and I thought it sort of sounded like beautiful air, which I thought was a nice name for it. It's one of those things you talk about always knowing. I remember rounding the corner in Central Square when I thought of that name. And I was thinking of the Dillon line. Sometimes I
feel just like Verlaine and Rimbaud, same family,
And I thought Baudelaire. But Joe still runs that business, and I was much more involved at the beginning when they were sort of establishing their brand, and still on a part of it. And it's so I had a lot going on.
And had a few nice trips to France.
We had a few nice trips to France,
Ireland, and a few other places.
Yeah,
met a lot of people.
Met some interesting people. Yes. Drank some interesting wine.
Yes, that's right. And so around that time, like I'm thinking back, early '90s, when so many of us were realizing that we needed to exercise and drink water and stop smoking and all of that stuff, and that was such. We were in our late 30s, I think, at that time. You started getting into sports, which you hadn't since you were a kid, pretty much.
Pretty much, and I was very into them as a kid. I had stopped smoking, and I don't know what I did for the first couple of years. I know I played piano for the time as a kid because I needed something to do. But I always remember there was a bike shop up on Putney Road, and I'm going to remember his name.
Oh, yes. It was a couple who owned it.
It was a couple that owned it.
Yeah, it was where Top of the Hill is.
Right.
Yeah.
And he, constructed a bike for me. It was this sort of silver bike of some sort. And I'd ride it, and, I knew that some people rode long ways, but I remember one time just going for a ride and then calling my wife, who happens to be you, and saying, you said, where are you? I said, I'm in Newfane. Like I had crossed the Atlantic. It was so far that I had gone.
Right.
And of course now we do that fairly straightforwardly.
During that time too, I was working at Planned Parenthood, so a lot of your boyfriends, from that time were a Planned Parenthood group, and I think a lot of the biking, especially, and climbing the mountain and taking advantage of that kind of thing started happening.
Wyndham Wheelman, really the first ones, well, I don't want to get in trouble by saying this because they might be wrong, but I biked with Tom Yon and Jack Wesley and Steve Morrison, people that really started, and then slowly I think it's kind of merged with the Putney people, and so it's kind of...
And could we bring that story back full circle?
Sure, let's do that.
To 2 years ago when you were biking?
Oh yeah,
on
that's
a
good.
Beautiful June day.
I think as people always say that if you're a biker, and I'm sorry if this doesn't apply, but there are two kinds of bikers, the ones that have had accidents and the ones that haven't had accidents yet. And I was 63 and I was part of the second group, the people that hadn't had accidents yet. And as people remember very well, when they were building the bridge, they had all these orange signs along the road out Route 30, and I probably biked them 20, 30 times that year. And I went for a ride one day and a wind came up, and so I sort of put my head down just as I was thinking I was about to hit the sign. And the sign I hit said, "Be prepared to stop," which, is, I've always been a little, nonconformist.
Cosmic irony.
Cosmic irony. And I don't like taking direction, I like doing my own thing. So, I broke my clavicle and almost collapsed. It collapsed my lung. It was really quite exciting.
Yeah, it was. And you have quite a deformed shoulder to show for it, which we're not going to show on the show.
We've scared little children with this, but it's called rugby shoulder, actually,
cool.
from what I understand.
It makes it much cooler.
Yes, thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about this other work that you do, which is being a guardian ad litem in town. And if you could explain to folks exactly what that is.
Guardian ad litems, called CASA volunteers in some states, are really different in every state. Vermont being what it is, we're probably more independent than people would like to know, but we really do. We enter the system. To me, we enter the system wherever we think the kid needs us to enter the system. Sure, we spend time with the kids, but you have lawyers with 150 cases, seriously. You have DCF workers with huge caseloads. You have kids who are delinquent, who are at schools that are trying to keep some kind of order. And we're sort of there. And when kids get involved in the legal system, we're trying to help the legal system work for the kids. Now, what's great about, maybe it's Brattleboro, but I sort of feel everyone's trying to do that. I feel the judge is trying to do it, the lawyers are trying, everyone's trying to do that. But and I think a lot of the lawyers look to us because we'll go to those school meetings. We'll go to the meetings at DCF. We'll talk to the foster parents if there's a foster parent. We'll talk to the kids. So we're kind of, it's not how the system, how it's usually described, but I feel that we're an important, we're volunteers, linchpin in the whole system. Each one of these cases, everything's so different. There's so many agencies, as people know, and they're all trying to do stuff, good stuff for this kid. So it's a great role. It can be frustrating a little bit. I think for a lot of people, it's very emotional. A few cases have been emotional for me. I think partly I go back to writer mode in a way when it's very, very difficult and say, okay.
You've heard some really difficult stories and astounding stories, and I think people don't know what's going on in our town in so many different ways, and this is one of them.
It's a great way to find that out. I don't like objectifying it. I don't like saying it's the opioid crisis or that it's poverty or that, I mean, everyone's different. And, I've had 2 cases in the last year where both women, where people have gotten off opioids. The clinic worked up the road, the Suboxone, it took them a long time, but it was a success. It's too bad the juvenile court is closed. It has to be closed, because anytime I hear anyone talk about, well, you know what they should really do? They should spend a day. I wish they could spend a day in juvenile court and see how individual these stories are and how every kid needs something different.
And I think this is what's coming out more and more. The more people I have on the show, anyone who's doing social services talks about that. Rihanna Kendrick was on last week and was talking about how you never know what's going to walk in the door, but everybody who walks in that door is a human being and is in need and knows where to come, which is one thing that's really incredible. And I think that, hearing the stories that you've told about being a guardian ad litem, you realize, oh, there are all these people in need for one reason or another, but again, every story is different, and you can do the best you can do, right?
And we're all in need. I mean, that's the thing. And what's interesting about if you scratch the surface, I don't care who it is in this town, you find a human being.
Yes.
I mean, not to be trite about it. And just as with issues like mental illness, you scratch the surface and someone has, if they haven't had it themselves, they haven't had a problem themselves, they've had it in their families. So there's all this commonness that we're totally unaware of, or we're aware of, we're almost afraid of acknowledging.
And we're all part of this community, you know, and that's the other piece of it.
Yeah,
that's the other piece of it. That's, you know, I think Ryan and other people have talked about, this is Brattleboro, this is our community, and that's a big part of why I wanted to do this show, is to show that there's so many different voices, and there's so many people doing so many extraordinary things, and coming up with basically the same kind of thing, that we're all in this together, we can help each other, we're small enough so that we can not only help each other but be aware of each other as we walk down the street. So and it also, as I know, serves the guardian ad litems well too. Like you get so much out of it, as difficult as it can be.
Yeah, it makes you humble in a funny way. I mean, I've learned things from these kids that just their resiliency and stuff. And again, it just breaks a lot of your prejudices down. You know, just people have meaningful lives. People do stuff, and it's meaningful to them, and they're finding their way. We're small enough that's possible. We might as well take advantage of it. You know?
That's a really good point. You've got a lot of projects going on right now. You've been writing some screenplays. You've been working on a book for which you got an advance on the history of opium. That's right. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
A little bit. I had a book that I hope I'll still do sometime called Changing Our Minds. Right. Because I think that instead of a book about drugs, it's the fact that all of us, whether we want to touch any substance or not, we always want to find ways to wake up more, to go to sleep, to get enlightened, to have sex, to go to war, whatever. You know, we have all these ways we want to change our minds, as I call it, change our minds. And my agent has submitted a proposal for it, and she got a call a year later from an editor and said, you know that book? She said, yeah, you want to do it? He said, no, but I want a book on opium. And what's interesting, I thought I'd just get a bunch of books and do the history, and that's how I got through college. You put a bunch of books on the floor, you highlight some things, and you write it. And the only line in the book I'm sure of is the first one that says, opium is reluctant to give up its secrets. The interesting thing about it, Papaver somniferum, which is the strain of poppies that they make opium from, or that opium comes from, the latex comes from, is that there's no clear ancestor of that. So it's sort of like, well, there's Papavers, but they can't figure out how it got here. So obviously it was aliens, but we all know that, right? Yeah. So it goes back then. It clearly was used to change consciousness in Sumerian times, Assyrian, Egypt, definitely in Egypt they used it to calm crying babies as a formula for calming crying babies. One of the most interesting times that we don't know about, because we're in Western civilization, is one of the most brilliant times in medicine was 900s in Persia. And they were writing 900-page encyclopedias of medicine, and opium, latex, was just a major part of their pharmacopoeia, as it became in China. It was another medicine. They knew how to use it.
Well, that sort of brings us to opioids and our current situation in this country and all over the world. So do you have anything, having been doing all your research about the historical opium poppy, do you have new thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the strength of the drugs they're coming out with, it's beyond the pale. At the same time, in terms of how society responds to drugs, I want to end every chapter with sound familiar. I have a little couple-page saying that goes something like in ancient China, 1650, emperor says you can't grow opium. Amount of opium use goes up, 10%, and on and on and on for 2 centuries. Edicts, they're strangling them, they're trying everything. Opium use keeps on going up. And there were overdoses there were addicts then. So anyone that thinks they know the answer doesn't. I see great things happening with things like methadone and Suboxone, but it's addiction's tough. And yet there's no need to give up on anyone. Really, fentanyl, the level of strength of these drugs is, we thought we knew a lot about drugs in our generation. We have to really pay attention, try to understand how we can help.
Because it's a whole different animal, actually.
It's a whole different animal. You could just, I mean, it's so easy. I mean, when we were once a kid would do acid and jump off the roof. I hate to say it that cavalierly, but you know, there were deadly drugs then.
Sure, yep.
And heroin was a deadly drug then. But we don't know the answers. We don't know what to do. We don't. And people really trying. People really trying.
Yeah.
So.
And so by writing this book, do you feel that it can shed some light on?
I hope so. I think there are certain facts that will come out, just, you know, to realize that there's a lot of racially driven opinions about drugs. There's a lot of culturally and ethnically driven opinions, as you mentioned, the Victorian times, where Victorian women and men were doing this laudanum, and it was very refined. And meanwhile, people hated the Chinese in San Francisco who were doing this terrible, nasty drug. So there is a lot of that will come out, and a lot of the stuff about prohibition. A lot. I've been thinking how to rephrase that. I would done, but if you, that thing that says if guns were outlawed, only outlaws would have guns. Well, if I guess I can't even say this, but crime comes from outlawing drugs, and the more you push, the more it pushes back. It seems pretty clear from history. The only person that really succeeded in pretty much stamping out drug use was Chairman Mao, and he had to kill a whole lot of people for it to happen. So we have to decide what we want to do, and I don't have the answers, but I think there's good information in there.
This has been a very fun conversation, David Blistein.
Now I see what you do in your spare time.
Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Something that we didn't cover are your favorite places to write in Brattleboro. Because there are little, we don't really have time, but if you can
do it anyway?
Like a lightning round.
Well, I don't want to, it's the favorite places and what you can do there, and I hope I don't leave anyone else out. Duo, you can pretty much work on your laptop anytime except the weekend. You can certainly read there.
You're talking about bar.
Bar, right, but we're going to do coffee shops too. Turquoise Grill, usually, you know, an iPad would be okay at Turquoise Grill because the bar is a little narrower. Bagel Works, you can go in any time. If you want to work outside, it has to be in the summer after the sun's gone that way. Amy's Amy's is a national treasure of Brattleboro, and that's pretty much my office. Well, one of my offices. And you can do, you know, work there. The bars are tough because, like, you wouldn't bring a laptop into Peter Haven's except under, you know, extreme conditions. Echo, you can, even on busy nights, I'll take one of those high tables and I can work there. So I'm sorry I left somebody out, but yeah, I mean, they're all offices to me.
In short, Brattleboro is your town.
It's my town. Bob Lyons thinks it's his town, but it's actually my town. You tell Bob.
You guys share.
Yeah, we
really
share.
Nicely.
It's a great town to be in. It's great, and you know, it's just great.
It is.
Yeah.
Lovely having you on,
being
honey.
here.
Thanks for coming on at the last minute. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. It was a different kind of day. It was a fun day. And we will see you next week.